This is a watercolor journal that I made for my granddaughter as a gift last year, and I thought that you might enjoy seeing how I made it. And then you can make your own either for yourself or to give away as a gift. And I felt, since she was young, I added quite a few pages where she could just color in with watercolors. And some of these pictures are actually on my blog, which I'll give you a link below where you can use them and trace, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, so just wanted you to see what it looks like, and then I'm going to go into exactly step by step how I created this watercolor journal coloring book for my granddaughter, and maybe it's something you might want to make too. Now, the first thing that I did was I took some watercolor paper from a watercolor pad, and it doesn't have to be the most expensive paper. Actually, I think I bought this pad at Michael's on sale. And I just took the pages out, and for this journal, I believe I used like 6 pages, and I just folded them in half. And as you can see, I'm using a bone folder, which I find is very handy to have for bookmaking. But you can use other things, such as an old card, like an old credit card or hotel card or something like that, also to use as in place of a bone folder. And here I am just, continuing to fold my pages. And now that they're all done, I'm just putting them together and getting ready for the second part of the process of creating a pamphlet style journal. And this is something you can do for anything if you like sketching or painting. You can do this just, for something that you can stick in your purse at any time, and it's a little bit less expensive than buying an art journal. So what I did here was I made 5 holes, and I tried to get them evenly spaced, and I did this on the cover of the pad, and I use this to make a guide. And then as you see, what I'm doing is I use the awl to make the holes after I determine the spacing of them. And here I'm using the guide on my first watercolor sheet, and I'm making marks, and I'm finding out that I didn't use the awl on the last mark, so I'm doing that now. Now, some people will take all of the sheets together for a pamphlet style journal and just do this at one time. They'll align them all and they'll use the awl at the same time to go through all the sheets in your journal. But I find that I tend to miss the crease of the fold unless I do it each page singular at a time, because I make the pencil mark and then I use the awl. So if I'm a little bit off on the pencil mark and it's not quite in the crease, then it's not a big deal because I haven't made the hole yet. So I'll make the hole exactly where I want it to be. So here I'm not even using the guide that I originally made. I'm just using one of the sheets, the first sheet that I put the holes in, as a guide. And you can do that too. But a lot of times I'll do the guide because if I'm making several journals, I'll know exactly how they were spaced, and I have that for future use. But if I just do it on the pages of the journal, then once I put it together, it's not going to be so easy. Now I created several pages for my granddaughter that were ready for her to color in with watercolors. And the first one that I did was, I was giving her a set of watercolors along with the journal as part of her gift. So I made these rectangles. I made like 8 rectangles, and I'm evenly spacing them apart. And I did that in pencil so that I can go back and just outline them with a Copic marker pen. And I use these Copic marker pens when I'm doing watercolors because I find that they don't bleed when you add the watercolors, and I just find that they last me a long time. So here I am, I'm making, because the watercolor kit that I gave her had 8 different colors. I'm basically giving her 8 different rectangles to explore those colors to start out with when she starts her journal. And then I'm just erasing the pencil here, and then I'm just writing to use a different color for each of the rectangles for her to start. Now this is a picture that you can get off of my blog, and there'll be a link below this video. And I'm just using graphite paper, and I'm tracing over it with a pencil. And if you don't have graphite paper, you can just print out the picture and basically shade the back of it with pencil and then do the tracing, and that'll also work. Or, if you're feeling real creative, you can just draw pictures on each page. Or if you're making this as a journal for yourself, you can leave them blank and just do watercolor paintings on it as you go along. And again, here I'm using a Copic marker in black. And again, for the same reason that I find that, it just doesn't bleed when you add the watercolors on it. And I've used it for a lot of other projects. And, you can do this for several of the pages like I did. And I have the mermaid also on my website. Now, this is the cover of the journal, and I'm using just, the watercolor paper as a cover. And as you noticed, what I did is I just wet down the whole cover, and then I'm dipping my paintbrush into, to start out with, the blue, and it was like a turquoise blue, and then a red. And I'm kind of going back and forth, adding a little bit more color. And I know that the blue and the red are going to blend to make a nice purple in the middle. And I'm just going back and adding color while everything's wet, and just to add more intensity until I'm happy with how it looks. And then while it's still wet, I'm adding salt. And this salt, I believe, was just Epsom salt that I had. You can use rock salt, kosher salt, sea salt. You can even use regular table salt. And what I'm doing right here is I'm adding more color to where the salt crystals are. And that, it'll make a really interesting effect on the cover. And after it dries, it kind of pulls in the color, and I just really like this technique. And I'm just lifting it up and letting the colors kind of drip and blend into each other. Now, after it was all dry, I just rubbed off all of the salt, and doing this before I start the next step of decorating the cover with stamps. And I used, right there, I just used a mouse pad, and it's not something you have to have when you're stamping. It just makes it a little easier and nicer. And I'm using Ranger ink in sepia, and it's an archival ink pad. And I'm just using a small little stamp of rabbits, and I thought that that would be a nice little theme for her book since she likes animals. And I'm just doing like a repeat pattern all over the front of the journal, just to give it a pleasing shape. And then I'm using my Copic marker just to write her name, and then I left a space where I'm going to put the ribbon to tie the book together, and then just let her watercolor journal. And I found that it just didn't pop up enough, so I took a blue marker, and this is just an art marker, and it doesn't have to be anything special, and I'm just kind of going over all of the letters to make them pop a little bit more and become more visible. And you can really use any kind of lettering at all that you choose. There's a lot of different lettering styles. If you're really into that, you can explore that and just have fun with it. I just decided to use a simple one because lettering isn't something I do very often, and it's not my biggest strength. So I kind of stayed with the simple, easy little plain lettering that I used for the front of this journal. But even that, I found, I really liked how it came out and how it looked. And it does, look handmade. So that's the whole thing. And here's all the pages, and I put them together in order that I wanted. Um, and I left one page blank so that if she wanted to be creative, and then I did pictures on all every other page. And again, you can use two of my coloring pages on my blog, and there's a lot of websites out there that have coloring pages if you're not real comfortable drawing your own pictures for your watercolor coloring book. So again, the mermaid and the raccoon are both on my blog with links below this video tutorial. So once I have all the pages ready, I had some crochet thread, and I know that's not traditionally the kind of thread that you use, but it was what I had on hand. And I'm just running it across a little stick of beeswax that I bought in the farmer's market, and that'll keep it from fraying, and it'll coat it so that it'll give it a little bit more protection and make it easier to sew. And here I'm using a large needle with a large eye, and it's just a utility needle that I found in my sewing supplies, and you can also buy it in Joann Fabrics or any place else where you can buy needles with a large eye. So I just brought the thread from the back of the book through the center hole, and then I'm bringing it out the next hole above it to the back of the book. And I'm leaving, a strand of thread where I started, and then I'm going back to the center of the book through the top hole that I made. And in the process, I'm trying to make sure I'm not tangling up any thread. And then I'm going down a hole and out through the back. And I'm trying to keep the thread relatively tight, but not too tight. And I brought it all the way down below the center hole to the next hole, and from the back of the journal to the front center of the journal. And then I'm going back to the last hole and out to the back of the journal, and then I'm going from the back of the journal to the center through the next hole up, and then I'm bringing the needle from the center to the center hole out through the back of the journal. And what I'm doing here is, I'm just making sure everything's untangled, and I made sure that there was a thread on each side of this thread on the outside of the journal in the center. And here I'm just kind of straightening and making sure that, everything's nice and neat, and just making a few plain old knots to hold the threads together. Now, in this tutorial, I'm going to continue and add beads to this, but you would not want to do that if you're giving it to a very young child. And I decided to add some pretty purple ribbon that I just picked up in a craft store, to add it to the front of the journal so I can close the journal in a pretty bow. And here I'm using fray check, because if I were just to cut the ribbon, it'll just fray. So this will keep it from fraying, and I'm setting it aside to dry before I cut it. And I'm getting the journal, and now I'm getting ready to add beads. And again, if you're giving this to a young child, do not add the beads, because they will be a choking hazard. So just be real careful and mindful about that. So I'm just adding a series of beads onto the needle, which I'm using what they call a big eye needle. So it is thin. It's used by beaders. I purchased it through Fire Mountain Gems, and it basically, the whole needle is an eye, so you can stick the thread through it, a heavier thread, and still be able to go through a variety of beads that may not have the biggest holes there. And after I put on the beads that I want for the one strand, I skip going in through the last bead, because the last bead is going to hold the beads on, and then I go back through all of the other beads. And for this particular journal, I actually had letter beads, and I spelled out her name with those beads, just to make it a little bit more fun. And here I'm just trying to get it so that I can get the thread out of the needle, and then I can have all the beads close to the spine of the book. And I'm kind of struggling a little bit with that, and I kind of wanted you to see that, because I don't want you to think everything goes perfect and smooth when you're creating something. So, sometimes it takes a little bit of patience and a little bit of time to make it the way that you want, and that's okay. And here I'm finally getting it, all the thread out, so that, it's basically, I'm struggling with the tail of the thread in the needle, because the beads are not that wide. So, and there, now I got the needle off, so I can kind of slide the beads closer to the spine and straighten everything out before I start knotting everything in place. And again, I'm just using a simple knot and tying it through the thread on the spine of the book to hold everything in place so that the beads don't fall off when she's using it. And I often do this for my own watercolor journals that I make. I like to add beads to it just because it gives it a nice decorative element and makes it pretty. So I kind of like surrounding myself with pretty little things, and especially when I'm doing my artwork. So here I'm, putting the thread through another, the same big eye needle that I used before, and just adding some more beads, one at a time. And these are just beads that I had laying around. And just kind of picked them because of the colors. And then once I have all the beads through, I kind of trimmed a little bit of the tail so that I didn't have to mess around with too long of a thread. And again, I'm skipping the last bead because that's going to be basically what you call a stop bead. So it'll hold all the other beads in place, and then go through the rest of the beads. And then pulling the thread through, and I'm trying again to get the tail out so that I can take the needle off. And this one went a little easier than the first one. And here I'm just kind of sliding all the beads as close as I can get to the spine of the book, and making my knots so that everything will be held in place and not fall apart when I'm done. And I do tend to do a lot of knotting so that it's more sturdy and durable. So maybe I'm a little overkill on that, so you might not have to do as many knots, but I find that it holds up a lot better. And then I just trim the excess. And now that the fray check is dry on the ribbon, I'm just cutting out the ends of the ribbon where I had applied the fray check. And I'm sliding the ribbon under the thread at the spine of the book and trying to decide exactly where I want to place the ribbon before I tie it on to the spine of the book. And there you have it. So it's done. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed it, subscribe to my channel. Bye now.